I don't know why I'm even telling this story. Maybe I think that saying it out loud will make it feel less real. Maybe I just need someone to know in case something happens to me. It started a few weeks ago. I live alone in a small house on the outskirts of town, a place I picked specifically because it was quiet. No neighbors too close, no busy streets, just me, the trees, and a long, winding road that disappears into darkness after sunset. I've never been scared of being alone. At least I wasn't. One night, I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone when I heard it. 3 slow knocks on my front door. It was nearly midnight. I sat up, heart pounding, listening. Maybe it was the wind knocking a branch against the house. Maybe I imagined it. But then, knock, knock, knock. The same slow, deliberate rhythm. I grabbed my phone, hesitated, then finally worked up the courage to check through the peephole. No one. I stood there for a while, waiting, my breath shallow. The front porch light buzzed softly. Nothing moved outside. The night was still, thick with silence. I locked the door, double-checked the windows, and went back to bed, telling myself it was nothing. I barely slept. The next morning, I found something on my front porch. Small, dirty footprints. Barefoot. Too small for an adult. A child? But there were no kids around here, no families nearby. The footprints led up to my door, and then stopped. No prints leaving. I should have left then. I should have packed my bags and never looked back. But I didn't. A few nights later, it happened again. The same slow knocking. I didn't check this time. I didn't move. I just lay there in bed, staring at the ceiling, gripping my blanket. The knocking lasted longer this time, minutes, maybe more. I lost track, then silence. I thought it was over, until I heard my bedroom door creak open. I froze. The darkness felt heavier, pressing down on me. I reached for my phone, turned on the flashlight, and shined it toward the doorway. Nothing. I was alone. I barely slept again. The next day, I checked the locks. The doors were still bolted, the windows latched. Nothing in the house was out of place, but I knew I had heard that door open. By the third night, I was exhausted, barely able to keep my eyes open. I told myself it was in my head. Sleep deprivation does weird things to the brain, but as I started to drift off, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. One new notification, a picture, from an unknown number. I almost didn't want to look, but my curiosity got the better of me. It was a photo of me, asleep in bed, taken from inside my room. I shot up, my stomach twisting, bile rising in my throat. I turned on every light, checked every closet, every corner. Nothing. I barely made it to sunrise without losing my mind. The second it was daylight, I called the police. They checked the house, found no signs of forced entry, and basically told me there was nothing they could do. Probably a prank, they said. Change your locks, set up a camera. I did both. But it didn't stop. The next night, the knocking came again. This time I ignored it completely, curling into myself under the blankets, pretending it wasn't happening. But then, my phone buzzed again, another picture. This time, it was a close-up of my bedroom door, taken from the hallway. I wasn't alone. I wanted to run, but where? Into the woods, onto the empty road where no one would hear me scream. I stayed frozen, barely breathing, listening, and then I heard the whisper, right next to my bed. "You let me in." I don't remember what happened after that. I must have blacked out because the next thing I knew, it was morning. The house was empty. The doors were locked. My phone had no messages, no photos, nothing. Like it never happened. But I know it did, because this morning when I went to make coffee, I found something in the sink. A single, dirty footprint. And I know it wasn't mine. I'm not staying here another night. I'm leaving. I don't care if I look crazy. I don't care if I never figure out what it was. Because I think if I stay, it won't let me leave.
Story number 2.
I don't scare easily. I grew up in a rough neighborhood. Learned early that fear doesn't get you anywhere. But there's something about being alone at night. When the world is quiet, when the shadows seem to move on their own, that gets under your skin. That's how it started. I had just moved into a new apartment, a small but decent one-bedroom on the 3rd floor of an old building. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The rent was cheap, probably because of the rumors. The landlord laughed when I asked about them. "People hear things in old buildings," he said. "Nothing to worry about." I should have worried. The first few nights were fine. I unpacked, set up my furniture, got used to the creaks and groans of the place settling. But then, one night, I woke up around 3 a.m. to a strange noise. A scratching sound. It was faint at first, like nails dragging lightly against wood. I sat up, listening. It was coming from inside my apartment, from my closet. I told myself it was a mouse. Old buildings always have pests, but as I lay back down trying to ignore it, the scratching changed. It became deliberate. A slow, rhythmic scraping, like someone was tracing shapes on the inside of the door with their fingernail. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I checked the closet. Empty. Nothing but my clothes and a few boxes I hadn't unpacked yet. No signs of mice, no scratches on the door. I shook it off, told myself I was imagining things. But the next night, it happened again. This time, it wasn't just scratching. I was lying in bed, trying to force myself to sleep when I heard it. Slow, shallow breathing. Not mine. From inside the closet, I went completely still. My mouth went dry. The breathing was soft, just on the other side of the door. Like someone standing there, waiting. I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't move. The air in the room felt thick, heavy, pressing down on me. And then, the closet door creaked open. Not fast, not sudden. Just a slow, steady inching, like something inside was pushing it open. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't blink. A dark sliver of the closet interior came into view. And then, nothing. The room was empty. The closet was empty. But I knew, deep in my bones, that something had been there. I barely made it to sunrise. I called the landlord the next morning, told him I wanted out of my lease. He sighed like he had heard it all before. "You're not the first," he admitted, "and you won't be the last." I asked him what was in the apartment before me. He hesitated, then finally said, "A woman lived there. Young, quiet. She left suddenly." "Left?" I repeated. He didn't answer right away. Then, in a lower voice, "Not exactly." I pressed him, and he finally gave me the story. The woman had been acting strange before she disappeared. She told neighbors someone was watching her, hiding in her apartment when she wasn't home. She started sleeping with the lights on, keeping the closet locked. One night, the neighbor downstairs heard her screaming. By the time anyone checked, she was gone. The only sign she'd ever been there was the open closet door, and deep scratches inside, carved into the wood. The police never found her. I didn't stay after that. I packed my things, breaking my lease without a second thought. I didn't care about the money. I just wanted out. On my last night there, I left the apartment bare, empty except for the mattress I'd been sleeping on. I didn't plan to sleep. I just had to make it until morning. I sat against the wall, staring at the closet door, waiting. At exactly 3 a.m., the scratching started. Not soft this time. Louder. Harsher. A frantic, desperate clawing. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. And then the door handle turned. Slowly. The closet creaked open. I grabbed my bag and ran. I never looked back. I don't know what happened to the woman who lived there before me. I don't know if whatever was in that closet got her or if she managed to escape, but sometimes late at night I think about it. And I wonder if that door ever really stayed closed.
Story number 3.
I've always been a night owl. I work late, stay up even later, and I enjoy the quiet. But now I hate the night, because that's when it comes. It started 3 weeks ago. I was working a late shift at my job and didn't get home until almost midnight. My apartment building is nothing special. Cheap rent, old walls, and the kind of flickering hallway lights that make everything feel a little off. I was exhausted, ready to drop when I noticed something strange. My door was unlocked. I hesitated. I was sure I had locked it before leaving. A little knot of unease tightened in my stomach, but I pushed the door open. Everything looked normal. Nothing missing. Nothing out of place. Maybe I had just forgotten to lock it. I shook it off. But later that night, I woke up to a sound. Soft, deliberate, breathing. It wasn't mine. It was close, just outside my bedroom door. I lay frozen, my body stiff with fear. The sound was slow, steady, as if someone was standing just beyond the door, listening. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. And then, tap, tap, tap. 3 light knocks. I nearly stopped breathing. The knocks were gentle, almost polite, like someone was waiting for permission to come in. I forced myself to sit up, my hands shaking. My phone was on the nightstand. I grabbed it, turned on the flashlight, and aimed it toward the door. The second the light hit, the knocking stopped. I waited, heart pounding. Nothing. I told myself I imagined it. Maybe I was dreaming. I checked the lock on my bedroom door, double-checked my apartment door. Everything was locked. Everything was fine. Or so I thought. The next night, I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. The same slow, deliberate knocking. I didn't move. I just listened. And then something happened that made my blood run cold. I heard my own voice, whispering, on the other side of the door. Let me in. I nearly dropped my phone. My entire body broke out in a cold sweat. It was me. My exact voice, mimicking my tone, but I knew. I hadn't spoken. I sat up in bed, my breath coming in short gasps. Silence. I didn't sleep. By morning, I'd convinced myself it was a trick of the mind. Sleep deprivation, stress, maybe even a lingering dream. But deep down, I knew better. The third night, I didn't sleep at all. I stayed up, waiting, watching. At exactly 3 a.m., the knocking started. Tap, 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 tap. My body went rigid. And then from the other side of the door, scratching. Long, slow drags of nails against wood. I wanted to scream, wanted to run, but I couldn't move. Then the whisper came again, my own voice, sickly sweet. Let me in. I gripped the sheets so hard my fingers ached, my pulse hammered in my ears, and then the doorknob started to turn. I lost it. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and aimed it at the door. The second the light hit it, the doorknob jerked back, and the scratching stopped. Silence. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next day, I did the only thing I could think of. I called a locksmith. Had them change every lock, reinforce the deadbolt. It made me feel a little safer. Until that night. I was in bed, scrolling through my phone, forcing my mind to stay occupied when I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. I squeezed my eyes shut. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Then the voice came again. Why won't you let me in? It sounded wrong, like someone wearing my voice like a mask. I wanted to scream, but my throat felt locked. And then I heard the worst sound of all. A second voice, a whisper. But this time, it came from inside my room, right next to my bed. I'm already here. The light flickered. The air turned freezing. I turned my head, slow as death, and saw nothing. The room was empty. But I knew. I wasn't alone. I didn't stay after that. I packed a bag, left that night, and never looked back. I don't know what it was, but sometimes in the dead of night when the world is quiet and the shadows grow long, I swear I still hear it. The tapping, the whisper, my own voice, asking to be let in.
Story number 4.
I hate working late shifts. By the time I get off, the streets are empty, the city feels hollow, and the quiet is too quiet. It used to not bother me, but ever since that night, I don't think I'll ever feel safe alone again. I work at a small diner off the highway. Not the kind of place people go to hang out. Just a stop for tired truckers, late-night wanderers, and the occasional loner who looks like they have nowhere else to be. It was a Tuesday, sometime after midnight, and we were slow. The only people left were a couple of guys in a booth, a waitress finishing up her shift, and me cleaning the counter. Then he walked in. I noticed him right away. Not because he looked dangerous. He didn't. He was average-looking with pale skin and dark hair, wearing a plain hoodie. But there was something off about him. He didn't walk in like most customers. He didn't glance around, didn't acknowledge the waitress when she greeted him. He just walked straight to a booth in the corner and sat down. Didn't look at the menu, didn't take off his hood, just sat there. At first, I thought maybe he was homeless, looking for a warm place to sit for a while. But the way he stared, not at anything in particular, just into the middle distance, made me uneasy. I walked over, menu in hand. Hey man, can I get you something? Nothing. He didn't move. Sir? I tried again. Slowly, his head turned toward me, and that's when I noticed it. His eyes. They were wrong. Too dark, too empty, like the space behind them wasn't human. Like there was nothing there. A chill ran up my spine. You shouldn't be here, he said. His voice was flat, emotionless. What? I let out a nervous laugh, trying to shake off the weirdness. He just stared. Then, slow as a ticking clock, he raised his hand and pointed behind me. I turned, instinct, I guess, but there was nothing. Just the empty diner, the flickering neon sign outside. I turned back. Look, man, do you want something? He was gone. The booth was empty. The air was ice cold, and my stomach dropped. I hadn't heard him move, hadn't seen him leave. I walked to the front door, looked outside. The parking lot was empty. No cars, no footsteps, nothing. I stood there for a long time, heart pounding. Eventually, the waitress asked what was wrong, and I lied, said I thought I saw something outside. I finished my shift, trying to shake the feeling of being watched. But when I got home, that's when things got worse. I live alone in a small apartment downtown. Nothing fancy, just enough for me. The second I stepped inside, I felt it. Something was wrong. It felt different, like the air was heavier. I checked everything, locked the door, looked under the bed, inside the closet. Nothing, but that feeling wouldn't go away. I told myself I was just being paranoid. Took a shower, tried to unwind, and then as I stepped out of the bathroom, I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. A soft, slow tapping, coming from inside my bedroom. I stopped breathing. The lights were off. The room was dark, but I knew I wasn't alone. Then, the closet door creaked open, just an inch. My hands went cold. My legs refused to move. Then, from inside the closet, a whisper. "You shouldn't be here." It was his voice. My stomach dropped. I ran. Didn't look back. Just grabbed my keys and bolted out the front door, down the stairs into the street. I didn't go back that night. I stayed at a friend's place, barely spoke, barely slept. The next morning, I convinced myself I had imagined it. Stress, exhaustion, whatever. I went back to my apartment. Everything was normal. The closet door was shut, no signs of anyone being there. But I still felt it, like something was waiting. I tried to go back to my routine, told myself it was over. Then a week later, I was closing the diner alone. The waitress had left early. It was just me locking up. And then the doorbell chimed. I turned, expecting to tell some late customer we were closed. But it wasn't a customer. It was him, standing in the doorway. Same hoodie, same pale face, same empty black eyes. He didn't blink, didn't move, just stared at me. And then he smiled. Not a normal smile, too wide, too unnatural. And in a voice that wasn't his own, he whispered, "You let me in." I slammed the door, locked it, turned off the lights and backed away, heart pounding so hard I thought I'd die. After what felt like hours, I finally built up the courage to look outside. He was gone, but my reflection in the glass, it wasn't mine. It was his.
Story number 5.
I don't know how to explain what happened. I don't know if anyone will believe me. But I have to tell someone. It started when I moved into this house. I got a great deal. Too good, honestly. A big old house in a quiet neighborhood, dirt cheap for what it was. The realtor said the last owner left in a hurry. No explanation, just packed up and vanished. I should have taken that as a sign. The first few days were fine. The place was old, sure, but nothing seemed wrong. Until the knocking started. It was my 4th night in the house. I was lying in bed, half asleep, when I heard it. Knock, knock, knock. Soft, faint, coming from inside the house. I sat up, heart pounding. It was late, too late for visitors. I listened. Silence. Maybe I imagined it. Houses settle, old pipes creak, nothing to be afraid of. Then, just as I started to relax, knock, knock, knock. This time, it was closer, right outside my bedroom door. A cold chill spread through me. My bedroom door was closed. I lived alone. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and aimed it at the door. My breath caught in my throat. The handle was turning, slowly. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Silence. The handle stopped. I sat frozen in bed, heart hammering in my chest. I waited, barely blinking, for what felt like forever. Then, gathering every ounce of courage I had, I got up, yanked the door open, and shined my flashlight into the hallway. Nothing. Just empty darkness stretching down the hall. I checked every room, every closet, every corner of the house. Everything was locked, no sign of forced entry. I told myself it was my imagination, that I was just tired. But the next night, it happened again. Knock, knock, knock. This time I didn't move. I just lay there, pretending I didn't hear it. Then, after a long silence, a whisper. "I see you." Right outside my door. I nearly stopped breathing. The voice was wrong, like 2 voices layered on top of each other. One high, one deep. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking, and turned on the flashlight, but this time, there was a shadow under the door. Someone was standing there. I couldn't move. I just stared, too afraid to blink. Then, the shadow moved, not walked, not turned, just shifted away, sliding back into the darkness. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I had every lock changed, got new deadbolts, barricaded my bedroom door, told myself whatever was happening, it couldn't get in. I was wrong, because the next night it didn't knock, it was already inside. I woke up to the feeling of something watching me. The room was pitch dark. My breath was shallow. Then, a whisper, right next to my bed. "Let me in." I couldn't move, couldn't scream. Then I heard it, breathing, right beside me. I turned on my phone's flashlight, aiming it wildly in the dark. The light hit the corner of the room, and something moved. I barely saw it, just a glimpse. A tall, thin figure, too long, too twisted, melting into the shadows like smoke. Then silence. The air was thick. The room felt wrong, like I was in a place I didn't belong. I didn't stay. I grabbed my keys, ran out of the house, and didn't look back. I spent the night at a friend's place. The next morning, I went back, packed my things, and left for good. But before I walked out of that house one last time, I made the mistake of looking down the hallway. My bedroom door was wide open, and just before I turned away, I swear, I heard it whisper, "You let me in."
Story number 6.
I used to love driving at night. There's something peaceful about the empty roads, the glow of the dashboard, the way the world feels like it belongs only to you. Not anymore. Not since what happened on Highway 93. It was late, probably close to 2 a.m. I had been visiting a friend a few towns over, and I was heading home, a long stretch of dark highway ahead of me. There were no streetlights, just the faint silver glow of the moon and my headlights cutting through the night. I was about halfway home when I saw the first sign. It was an old wooden post by the side of the road, the kind you barely notice. But something about it caught my eye. It had a single word painted on it in black, uneven letters. Stop! I frowned. There wasn't an intersection or a stop sign anywhere, just endless road and trees stretching into darkness. Maybe it was an old sign for something that used to be there. I kept driving. A few miles later, I saw another sign. Same rough wooden post, same black letters. Turn back. A cold chill crept down my spine. It looked newer than the first one. The paint was fresh, like someone had put it there recently. I told myself it was probably a prank, some weird roadside joke. But then I saw the third sign. It was planted directly beside the road and standing tall like it was waiting for me. This time, the message was different. You're not alone. I slammed on the brakes. The night felt too quiet. The air in my car suddenly felt thick, suffocating. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Nothing but empty road. But I felt it. Something was wrong. I took a deep breath, forced myself to keep driving. The signs were weird, sure, but they were just signs. Then about a mile later, my radio crackled. I hadn't been listening to anything, hadn't even turned it on. But suddenly, static hissed through the speakers. A faint voice broke through. At first, it was too distorted to make out. Then, don't look. I nearly swerved off the road. The voice was hollow, distant, like a whisper coming from deep underwater. My hands were ice cold on the steering wheel. I reached for the radio, twisting the knob, trying to turn it off. The static faded. Silence. I let out a shaky breath. Then, a tap on my window. Soft, just once. Like someone was trying to get my attention. I felt my entire body seize up. I was going 70 miles an hour. There was no one outside my car. The air turned thick, pressing against my chest. I kept my eyes on the road, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles ached, and then, in my rearview mirror, I saw it, a figure. Sitting in my back seat. I couldn't make out details, just a dark shape, twisted and wrong, like it didn't quite fit into the space. I wanted to scream, but my throat locked up. Then, from the back seat, a whisper. You saw me. The voice was right behind my ear. I lost control. The car swerved wildly, tires screeching. I barely managed to correct it. Heart hammering. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I focused on the road, on the endless stretch of darkness ahead. And then, another sign, standing alone in the middle of the highway. Don't stop. I slammed my foot on the gas. The car roared forward, flying past the sign. My vision blurred. My breath came in ragged gasps. The radio crackled back to life. The voice, clearer this time. Almost home. I gritted my teeth, gripping the wheel until my fingers went numb. And then, just as suddenly as it started, the radio cut out. The air in the car lightened. And when I finally dared to look in the rearview mirror, the back seat was empty. I didn't stop driving until I reached my house. I stumbled inside, locked every door, turned on every light. I didn't sleep that night. I don't drive that highway anymore. But sometimes late at night when I'm alone, I hear it. A soft tap on the window and a whisper. You saw me.
Story number 7.
I never believed in ghosts. Not really. Sure, I liked scary movies, read horror stories, even went on a few of those haunted house tours for fun, but none of it ever felt real until I moved into apartment 405. It was a steal. Cheap rent in a good part of town, a decent-sized place, and best of all, it was mine. The landlord didn't say much about why the last tenant left, just that they moved out suddenly. I didn't ask questions. I should have. The first night I noticed something off. I woke up around 3 a.m. to a strange sound. Drip, drip, drip. I groaned, rolling over. Probably a leaky faucet. I made a mental note to check it in the morning. But as I lay there, eyes adjusting to the darkness, I realized the sound wasn't coming from the bathroom. It was coming from the ceiling. I frowned. Maybe the upstairs neighbor left a sink running. Annoying, but not terrifying. The next morning I checked. No stains, no leaks, no sign of water damage. Weird, but whatever. That night, it happened again. Drip, drip, drip. Soft, steady, coming from above me. But this time, when I looked up, there was a dark spot on the ceiling, a single wet patch, and it was growing. A sick feeling twisted in my stomach. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and aimed it upward. The stain was deep red. I shot out of bed. There was no way that was water. I went to the landlord first thing in the morning, told him there might be a leak or something worse in the apartment above me. He just stared at me for a long moment before finally saying, "There is no apartment above you." I laughed, thinking he was joking. He wasn't. Apartment 405 was the top floor. There was nothing above me. I didn't know what to say. Just stood there feeling my stomach drop. Then he sighed, rubbing his temples. "Look, I probably shouldn't tell you this, but the last tenant complained about the same thing." "What do you mean?" I asked. He hesitated. "She said she kept hearing noises at night, dripping sounds, knocking, even whispers." My skin went cold. "What happened to her?" His jaw tensed. "She left in the middle of the night, didn't even take her stuff." I swallowed hard. "Why?" He looked at me, eyes dark. "She said something was trying to get in." I left his office shaken, but trying to rationalize. There had to be a logical explanation. I convinced myself it was just paranoia. That night, I kept the lights on. Around 3 a.m., I heard it again. Drip, drip, drip. I squeezed my eyes shut, telling myself to ignore it. Then, knock, knock, knock. My breath caught. The sound wasn't coming from my door. It was coming from the ceiling. I stared, frozen, as the knocks came again. Knock, knock. Slow, deliberate, like something was up there, waiting. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and aimed it upward. The stain was bigger now. And in the middle of it, something moved. I choked on a gasp, stumbling backward. There was something in the ceiling. A shape, barely visible, shifting beneath the surface like it was pressing against thin skin. Then a whisper, faint, right above me. "Let me out," I ran. Didn't stop to grab anything and just bolted out of the apartment and into the hallway, heart hammering. I spent the night in my car, wide-eyed and shaking. By morning, I convinced myself I imagined it. Sleep deprivation, paranoia, stress. I needed to calm down. I went back, determined to prove there was nothing to be afraid of. The stain was gone. The ceiling was perfectly clean, like nothing had ever been there. I wanted to believe I was losing my mind. That would have been easier to accept. But deep down, I knew something was in that apartment and it wanted out.
Story number 8.
I used to babysit a lot in high school. It was easy money, and most nights were quiet. Put the kids to bed, watch TV, and wait for the parents to come home. But there was one night I'll never forget, and I'll never babysit again. The Walkers were a nice couple, a little on the older side. Their son, Ben, was 6. Sweet kid, a little shy, but well-behaved. They lived in an old house on the edge of town. Big, with creaky wooden floors and too many rooms. The kind of place that always feels a little too quiet. That night started like any other. The parents left around 7 p.m., reminding me that Ben's bedtime was 8:30. They'd be home by midnight. Easy. Ben was already in his pajamas, watching cartoons when I got there. I sat with him, flipping through my phone while he laughed at the screen. Then around 8:15, he turned to me and asked, "Can you check the closet before I go to bed?" I smiled. "There's nothing in your closet, buddy." He looked at me, serious. He doesn't like when I don't check. A little chill ran down my spine. "Who doesn't like it?" I asked. Ben hesitated. Then, in a quiet voice, he said, "The man in the closet." I laughed, trying to play it off. "There's no man in the closet, Ben." But his face didn't change. "He thinks you won't look." I swallowed. It was probably just his imagination. Kids get scared of closets, of the dark, of shadows. But the way he said it, I sighed, standing up. "All right, let's check the closet." Ben grabbed my hand as we walked to his room. I flicked on the light. It was a normal kid's room. Stuffed animals, a tiny bed, drawings on the walls. The closet was a little open, just a crack. I took a deep breath and pulled the door wide. Nothing. Just toys, some clothes, and a few boxes. "See?" I said, smiling. "Nothing to worry about." Ben peered inside, frowning. Then, after a moment, he whispered, "He's hiding." A cold shiver ran down my spine. I ruffled his hair, trying to shake off the unease. "Time for bed, okay?" He didn't argue, just climbed into bed, pulling the covers up to his chin. As I turned off the light, he mumbled, "Don't leave the door open." I shut the closet door tight. Then I left the room, trying to laugh at myself. It was just a kid's overactive imagination, right? I settled on the couch, scrolling through my phone. The house was dead quiet. Every creak and groan of the old wood made me jump. Then I heard something. A soft creak from upstairs. I held my breath, listening. Silence. Then another creak, like slow, careful footsteps. I sat up, my heart pounding. Ben, I stood and made my way to the stairs, every instinct telling me not to go up there, but I had to check. As I reached the top, I froze. Ben's door was open, but I had closed it. A cold sweat broke out on my skin. I stepped forward, peering inside. Ben was asleep, tucked under his blankets, and his closet door was open. Not just a crack, wide open. I stared. I knew I shut that door. Did he get up and open it? I swallowed hard and stepped inside. The room felt ice cold. Slowly, I walked toward the closet. My pulse pounded in my ears. I reached out, and the light bulb flickered. I yanked the closet door shut and backed away. Ben stirred, but didn't wake up. I stood there for a long moment, listening to my own shaky breathing. Then I left, making sure to close his door again. I went back downstairs, trying to calm myself down. Nothing was wrong. Then, about an hour later, I heard it. A soft rustling sound, like something moving upstairs. And then, a whisper. She saw me. I nearly screamed. The voice was soft. Too soft, and it came from the baby monitor. My hands shook as I grabbed it. The screen was grainy, the black and white image flickering slightly. Ben was still in bed, curled under the blankets, but the closet was open again, and standing inside it was a tall, shadowy figure. No features, no face, just a black shape, too long, too still. Watching. My breath caught in my throat. Then the figure moved, slowly stepping out of the closet toward Ben. I bolted up the stairs, heart slamming against my ribs. I burst into the room, flicking on the light. Nothing. Ben was still asleep. The closet was open, but it was empty. I grabbed Ben and carried him downstairs, barely breathing. He woke up slightly, mumbling sleepily against my shoulder. "You made him mad," he whispered. I stayed on the couch with Ben in my lap, every light in the house on. I didn't move until his parents got home. I wanted to tell them everything, but when they walked in, I saw the exhaustion on their faces, the way they smiled at Ben, and I couldn't do it. Would they believe me? Would I believe it if I hadn't seen it? So I lied, said everything was fine. They paid me, thanked me, and I left as fast as I could. I never went back. I never babysat again. But sometimes at night, I dream of that shadow in the closet, and I hear a whisper. She saw me.
Story number 9.
I work the night shift at a gas station just off the highway. It's usually quiet, just truckers stopping for coffee, the occasional late-night traveler looking for snacks. It gets lonely, but I don't mind. At least, I didn't. Until the man in the wet clothes started showing up. The first time I saw him, it was around 2 a.m. The security cameras beeped, letting me know someone had pulled up. I looked at the monitor. A man was standing at pump 3, staring at the gas station. He wasn't moving, just standing there, completely still. His clothes were dark and soaked, like he had been standing in the rain for hours, but it hadn't rained in days. Something about him made my skin crawl. I waited for him to come inside, maybe pay for gas, maybe ask for something, but he never moved. Minutes passed. He just stood there. Finally, I grabbed the store phone and pretended to dial something. As soon as I lifted the receiver, he turned, not walked, not stepped, just turned as if his whole body moved at once. Then he walked away, didn't get in a car, didn't pump gas, just disappeared into the dark. I checked the cameras again. Nothing. The lot was empty. I told myself it was a weird trick of the light, a random drifter. Maybe I imagined how wrong he looked. But the next night, he came back. 2 a.m., same pump, same wet clothes. This time, I watched the cameras closely. His face was pale, too pale. And his eyes, they weren't looking at the store. They were looking at me. I felt ice crawl up my spine. I tried to ignore him, focus on my work, but my hands shook every time I counted cash, and I found myself glancing at the monitor every few seconds. He never moved, just stared. Then, just like the night before, he turned and walked away. I didn't sleep when I got home, and the next night, I was dreading my shift. I tried to tell my coworker about it, but he just laughed. "Gas stations get weird people all the time," he said. "It's probably just some homeless guy messing with you." I nodded, tried to believe that. But that night, I saw him again, at 2 a.m. on the dot. Only this time, he was closer. He wasn't at pump 3 anymore. He was standing right outside the store. The glass doors slid open. My breath caught. The air inside the store suddenly felt thick, heavy. He stepped in. I forced myself to act normal. Can I help you?" He didn't answer. His clothes dripped onto the floor, leaving dark puddles. Then he smiled. It wasn't a normal smile. It was too wide, stretching too far across his face. Then, in a voice that sounded wrong, he said, "You're not supposed to be here." I felt my stomach drop. My throat tightened. What do you mean?" He didn't answer, just kept smiling. Then slowly he turned his head, not his body, just his head, tilting it unnaturally to the side. I felt frozen. My hands gripped the counter so hard they ached. Then just as suddenly as he came in, he turned and walked back outside. I locked the doors the second he left. And this time I watched him. I followed his every movement on the cameras, refusing to blink. He walked across the lot, across the highway. Then he stepped into the woods and vanished. The rest of my shift, I sat there, staring at the monitor, heart pounding. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to quit, call someone, do something. But who would believe me? By the time morning came, I convinced myself it was just some unhinged guy playing games. I went home, exhausted, and collapsed into bed. And then I dreamed of water. Dark, endless, a lake stretching for miles, and beneath the surface, eyes, hundreds of them, staring. I jolted awake, gasping for air. My phone buzzed. A text from my coworker. Dude, check the news. My hands shook as I opened it. The headline hit me like a punch to the gut. Body found in lake 3 miles from gas station. I scrolled down, scanning the article. Then I saw it. The picture. A grainy police photo of the body they pulled from the lake. I knew that face. It was him, the man in the wet clothes. But the article said he had been missing for 10 years, and he had died the night he disappeared. I slammed my phone down, my heart racing. I wanted to believe it was a coincidence, that it wasn't him, that I hadn't spent the last 3 nights watching a ghost walk into my store. But deep down I knew. And when my shift started that night, I called in sick. I never went back. I don't work nights anymore, but sometimes when I drive past that gas station, I swear I see him, standing at pump 3, smiling.
Story number 10.
It started on a Wednesday night, one of those chilly fall evenings where the wind howls like an uninvited guest. I'd just moved into a small old house on the outskirts of Salem, Massachusetts, a town infamous for its haunted history. I was excited to live there, being a fan of all things creepy, but excitement quickly turned into a regret I'll never shake. That night, I was home alone. My roommate, Sarah, had gone out of town for the week to visit family. I thought I'd have the place to myself for some peace and quiet, maybe binge a few true crime documentaries before bed. But as I sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket with a bowl of popcorn, something didn't feel right. The first thing that tipped me off was the sound. At first, I thought it was the wind rattling the old windows, but then I realized it was coming from inside the house. A faint creak, like the floorboards were groaning under someone's weight. I paused the TV, holding my breath as I strained to listen. Silence. Maybe I imagined it, I thought. I shook it off, hit play, and tried to focus. But then it happened again, this time louder and closer. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking. No response. The house was old, sure, and probably prone to settling noises. That's what I told myself. Still, I grabbed my phone, turning on the flashlight as I stood up to investigate. The living room was empty, the kitchen too. The doors were locked, windows shut. Nothing seemed out of place. Then I heard it again, a soft creak from upstairs. I froze. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. Sarah's room was upstairs, but she wasn't here, and I was certain I'd locked her door earlier that day. Probably the wind, I whispered to myself, though I didn't believe it. With shaky hands, I climbed the stairs, each step louder than the last, in the eerie stillness of the house. When I reached the landing, the hallway stretched out in front of me, dimly lit by a single flickering bulb. Sarah's door was at the far end, slightly ajar. That stopped me cold. I knew for a fact I'd shut it. "Is someone there?" I managed to croak. Again, no response. I inched forward, my flashlight trembling as I aimed it at the door. The air felt heavier the closer I got, like the house itself was holding its breath. When I reached the door, I pushed it open with my foot, the hinges squealing like a scream. The room was empty. I sighed in relief, but it was short-lived. On Sarah's bed was something I couldn't explain, a single handprint pressed into the middle of the comforter. It wasn't mine. The print was massive, the fingers long and spindly, almost inhuman. And it wasn't just an indentation. There was dirt smeared around it, like someone or something filthy had touched it. I backed out of the room, my flashlight shaking so badly the beam jumped all over the walls. That's when I noticed something even worse. Footprints. They led from Sarah's bed to the closet. My mind raced. Do I run? Call the cops? Confront whoever, or whatever, was in there? Before I could decide, the closet door moved. Just a tiny twitch, but enough to send me reeling backward. I bolted downstairs, my phone clutched tightly as I dialed 911. The operator's calm voice did little to steady my nerves as I stammered out what was happening. She told me to stay on the line and that officers were on their way, but the noises didn't stop. While I waited, I heard footsteps descending the stairs, slow and deliberate. My eyes locked on the staircase, and my breath hitched as a shadow stretched across the wall. Then it stepped into view. It wasn't a person. I don't know what it was. Tall and impossibly thin, its limbs bent in ways that made my stomach churn. Its face, or what should have been its face, was a pale, blank surface, like a mask without features. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. It stood at the base of the stairs, tilting its head like it was studying me. Then it took a step forward, and I snapped out of my paralysis, bolting for the front door. The knob wouldn't turn. Behind me, the creature let out a low, guttural sound, a cross between a growl and a moan. I pounded on the door, screaming for help, when suddenly the lights flickered and went out. I spun around, pressing my back against the door as I held up my phone's flashlight. The beam landed on nothing but empty space. It was gone. The next few minutes felt like hours. I stayed frozen there, heart hammering, until red and blue lights finally flashed through the windows. The police burst in, finding me huddled in the corner, shaking and barely coherent. I told them everything, but they found no signs of forced entry. No dirt on the bed, no footprints. Nothing. They probably thought I was crazy, but I know what I saw. After they left, I packed a bag and went to stay with a friend. Sarah moved out as soon as she got back, though I never told her why. The house sits empty now, and I've heard rumors about its history. Stories of previous tenants who experienced strange occurrences, some even disappearing without a trace. I don't care to find out if those rumors are true. But sometimes late at night, I think about that handprint, those footprints, and the way it tilted its head at me like I was the intruder in its home. And I wonder, what would have happened if I hadn't made it to the door?